more or get concepts confused as time passes. So I think you're right. I think really all you really need to do is just say, I want to think about it. I want to sleep on it. Not an analytical process, and just get up in the morning, see what your gut feel is like, and whether or not you want to take a step in the right direction, and then go from there. So I'd like to make a suggestion for you then, if I may. Okay. One of the things a lot of my clients have found useful when they're at the same crossroads where you are, where they're thinking about transitioning on board, but they're not sure, is they found it useful to create a goal for themselves in terms of a timeline, a goal for making this decision. The market's showing lots of signs of weakness, lots of volatility. And what I hate to do, since this is really just, it's not an analytical process, you're really just thinking about it, is I hate to have you get analysis paralysis or just forget about it and procrastinate, and the market drops 1,000 points and you lose, $50,000. I mean, that wouldn't be a good thing.
No.
So once again, that's why a lot of my clients have told me they find it helpful when trying to make this decision to create a goal for themselves in terms of timeline for making this decision. That way there you go home, put it on your calendar, and it's there, and at least stays in the forefront of your mind. Does that seem like a reasonable recommendation?
Yeah, it does.
In light of that, Steve, what do you think is a reasonable goal for you in terms of timeline for making this decision?
I don't know, a week or two.
Okay. All right, I think that's reasonable. Okay. May I make one more suggestion then?
Feel free.
Okay. Since you said you're 90% toward making the decision, since you're most of the way there, here's what I'd like to recommend. I'd like to go ahead and schedule a follow-up opportunity with you for us to get together, maybe in a week or two. That way there you can go home, you can put it on your calendar, and you'll have a visual representation of that goal. Okay? And then assuming that the 90% holds true and you decide that you want to move forward, we'll already have the meeting scheduled, you can come on in and we can go ahead and make the appropriate changes. On the other hand, if you sleep on it and you decide you don't want to move forward, hey, you can always call me and cancel. I won't be heartbroken. Does that seem like a fair recommendation?
I guess there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. And I think it would make sense to take that next step. Then, and like I said, the only thing I do ask is that, if you decide definitely not to come on board, not to make the change, then give me a call. Let me know. And I'd also ask that you give me 48 hours notice. That's all. So you're not canceling last minute.
Yeah, that sounds fair enough.
Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay. Why don't we take a walk over into my office and we can get that scheduled in.
Okay.
Advisors, notice what we had done in the previous section. We'd ended up by taking those 5 options and pretty much getting them to agree that chances are I am the best option working with me. So then we started this frame by doing the infamous close, if you're committed to me, I'm committed to you. Let me tell you my philosophy. If you're committed to me, I'll spend as much time as it takes for you to feel comfortable with the recommendations. With that thought in mind, where do we go from here? And I also talked about the fact that if a lot of my clients, once again, I'm not telling him that's what I suggest, but a lot of my clients, just like him, have found it's better to make that commitment and put the wheels in motion. That way there, when they have their Dear John conversation with their advisor, they can always backpedal if they need to, and simply say, it's already done. This decision's already made. And oftentimes by taking that approach, it becomes a lot less stressful for the prospect with that Dear John conversation. So that was my last pitch to try to get him to make that commitment. And at the very end, and by the way, a lot of times that will work at that point. You've made such a compelling argument. You've let them know that they're off the hook. If they want to put you on as broker of record, go through the process and transfer it back, they can. It doesn't cost them anything. But this particular fellow was one of those just I want to think about it people. But what it came down to was, that was about the 5th I want to think about it. I really dug down deep as to every area that he might want to think about it. We got all the answers, and it's really just a gut instinct at this point. When you get someone to that level, there's nothing you can do. And the best thing you can do is get them to commit to a time frame, a goal in terms of timeline. He said 1 or 2 weeks. Suggest that you follow up with a phone call and go from there. Now notice how I did that. I said, Steve, may I make a suggestion? Very respectful. May I make a suggestion? Yes. Here's what a lot of my clients have found, just like you. And I went through the suggestion. Almost every time they're going to say yes to that because it makes sense. Also notice I said that, look, you can always call me and cancel. I won't be heartbroken. If you don't want to move forward, please do that. I'm trying to really stress to the person that this is it. This was their one free meeting, period. Now they've got to make a decision. I don't work for free. You see, salespeople work for free. Salespeople spend all that time putting together a fancy proposal. They show it to the person. They hope and pray that they become a client. If you want to be viewed as a trusted advisor, not a salesperson, then you can't work for free. You need to let them know that, look, this is the free meeting, and you're giving them some time. You're scheduling a tentative second meeting, but if they decide not to come on board, they should cancel. Just give me 48 hours. I won't be heartbroken. Now, what if I didn't think it was that strong? In this case, I scheduled a follow-up meeting because I thought that Steve was strong. Steve was 90% toward coming on board, okay? And by the way, his mannerisms, he was very non-committal in his words, if you noticed. But for those of you who know Steve, that's just his personality. He's very non-committal. He's always in the middle like that. He's our resident analytical, as you heard me say before. Well, most people by that point are going to be a lot stronger in their answers. Steve wasn't, because that's his nature, but he said that 90% chance toward moving forward. So I scheduled that follow-up meeting. If it was something that I thought was a lot weaker or still more of a long shot, I would have done the same thing, except I wouldn't have scheduled a follow-up meeting. I would have suggested a follow-up phone call. And I simply would have made a suggestion. Let's create a goal in terms of timeline for making the decision. Go home, put it on your calendar. And oh, by the way, Mr. Prospect, may I ask you one more favor? What's that? Will you do me a favor and call me in 2 weeks when you make that decision? Will you go write it down on your calendar? Yes, Dave, I will. You promise? Scout's honor? Yes. And I let them promise me that they're going to make that follow-up phone call. Now, of course, 3/4 of the time they're not going to do it, but I put a note that pops up for me 2 weeks from now on my client management system, where I then make an outgoing phone call and remind them and see if they've made a decision. Because if it's a weaker candidate, it may be worth a phone call, but it's certainly not worth me blocking out an hour of my schedule at that point. Okay? But once again, Steve seemed a little stronger. He was talking about 90% he's going to come on board with us, so I decided to schedule that follow-up meeting.